I wanted to do a screencast of each of the projects that we're doing, plus on my own an individual screencast of how this semester and the stage went. So this screencast is for the reconciliation project that I did with Alana, Katie, and Eric. We came up with the idea to create a database where we would contribute to either one-off lessons or units that are based around Indigenous people, communities, and culture. And then our idea is we would add to this database throughout our stage, hopefully at the beginning of the stage. And then we would get memory keys and take these memory keys to our host schools and hopefully spread the word by like that, where they can take the memory key and they can either take a lesson or unit plan, but they can also contribute one as well. This plan started off really great. We filled the database with a lot of great material. We wanted to come up with a way that teachers could incorporate Indigenous-based lessons and units without having the hassle of planning them on their own. The calls to action we chose to concentrate on is, I'll quote it, "We call upon the federal, provincial, and territorial governments in consultations and collaborations with survivors, Aboriginal peoples, and educators to 1. Make age-appropriate curriculum on residential schools, treaties, and Aboriginal peoples, historical and contemporary contributions to Canada, a mandatory education requirement for kindergarten to grade 12 students. Provide the necessary funding to post-secondary institutions to educate teachers on how to integrate Indigenous knowledge and teaching methods into the classroom." This call to action really resonates with our project and intentions because it targets specifically teachers and the school board, which I believe there's a lack of transmitting that knowledge, which therefore creates a barrier of reconciliation between Indigenous communities and the rest of Canada. So a challenge we could face would be receiving resistance from our host schools or school boards in general who may not see the importance in contributing lessons or units devoted to learning about Indigenous history, struggles, and culture, which we often see. This is a typical way of how people react when faced with such topics that, they want to push the blame off, say that, well, it's not our fault. We didn't do this to the Indigenous people. But yeah, we did, and we have to take responsibility for that. And the first step to reconciliation is becoming aware that we are a part of the problem, just because it might not have happened in the student's lifetime, or it might not have happened in our own backyard. In a sense, it did, because it's happening in our own country, and that's the first step, is to identify the problem and identify that we were a part of the problem. And then the next step would be the reconciliation and how can we advance. I think going to the school boards would be hard, so I think that's why we wanted to start at a lower level with teachers first. This way, teachers may include a couple of lessons and eventually build to making a unit plan around this subject. Theoretically, the database would be filled with either mini units or entire unit plans that teachers can use. And now that I'm doing the screencast at the end, I can say that a lot of my teammates contributed one-off lessons. I contributed a whole unit plan because I know that it might be hard for teachers and to just have one-off lessons. That might be great, but it might be a little bit random for them as well. A couple of struggles we faced personally, I will say, during this project is that there was a lack of communication. I think that's because we were all very stressed and busy with the stage in general that we kind of put it on the back burner. And then I found us kind of struggling at the end to make sure everything was okay. Even though we were all, I would say, contributing to the database throughout our stage, it was that lack of communication that, sometimes, example, Katie sent me a message being like, "Oh, Paula, did you contribute?" When I did. It's just that we never communicated amongst ourselves when somebody contributed, so the other people didn't know who contributed what and what was going on. So I think that lack of communication didn't help us. I will say we all contributed fairly and equally. Some people got outside resources from our peers to help us, which was kind of nice. With the coronavirus, of course, we did not get the chance to finish our project. The database itself is done to our degree, but in the sense that I did not get a chance to receive any of the memory sticks, and I didn't get that chance to deliver them to my host school, which is Alexander Galt, which I would have liked to do. I wanted that time to talk to the English department to see if any other teachers had any other, Indigenous lesson plans for us to use. And I also wanted to give them a memory stick and say, hey, this is a lot of great resources that you could use in your curriculum, you could use in your units. And, if you had any material to give back to us, put it on this memory stick. In the future, as I mentioned in some of my reflections, I think a way of just making sure that the database grows is that I think to maybe sign up for the database, you should have to contribute at least a minimum of one lesson. Otherwise, people might just take from the database and never contribute, and then that would impede the growing of the database. Overall, I really enjoyed this project idea, and it's something that, because I didn't get to finish, and I'm kind of sad that we didn't get to pass it on to our host schools, that in the future, should I get a job at Galt or surrounding high schools, that I want to bring these memory keys to that school. And I think this is such a great idea, and it's just a subtle way of getting that reconciliation in there, because I do know that some schools will put up resistance when faced with this issue. I don't see why, but I know that a lot of schools do. So this is kind of a subtle way, to get in there with lessons that could be helpful for the teachers. Those are my thoughts on our project. That's all I want to say regarding our project is, we struggled with communication. I would personally like to have met up at least once in person. Granted, I know that is kind of hard to do when we're all at different schools, but I think we should have maybe taken, had we had the chance to finish our stage, one weekend, just to make sure everything was okay, to say, hey, did it go well? Giving the memory sticks to all of our host teachers. I communicated the idea the first week with my teacher. I wanted to be proactive with this, and she was very open to this idea. She liked the idea. And I tried to bring in a couple of Indigenous lessons throughout my units at Galt. And the kids, they had some knowledge, but not to the degree I thought they would. I was teaching level 3 and level 4 English. And at first they said, yeah, we've heard about residential schools in history class. But I said, okay, well, why is it important? And then we talked about community and how this is a problem that is happening in our community, and that Indigenous people are a part of our community. And it's a problem that many humans in our community are still dealing with the after effects of residential schools. And if they mentioned earlier that a community is a shared space, well, then these Indigenous communities share the same space as we do. So for the most part, students were really, I would say I was happy to know that they wanted to learn. They were curious. And I think it's just how you present the material to them. So this is my screencast. Sorry, it went a little long. Sometimes I ramble. This is my screencast for the Indigenous reconciliation project we did.